Nearly 500,000 people have signed a Change.org petition demanding that First Lady Melania Trump either move into the White House with her husband or reimburse taxpayers for the cost of providing security for her at Trump Tower. Although the petition claims the cost is exorbitant, it's hard to know exactly how much taxpayers are spending. The Secret Service's budget is not public, but the New York Police Commissioner recently said that it costs the NYPD up to $146,000 a day to protect the First Lady and the couple's son Barron at Trump Tower. The city is asking the federal government to reimburse those expenses. Meanwhile, the president is currently golfing at his club in Virginia, his 14th golf course trip in the 10 weeks since he's been president. Kristen, Yashar, Michelle, and Fernand Amandi are back with us, and Fernand is actually joining us for the first time today. So I'm going to first come to you, though, Kristen, on just the hypocrisy of the golf. Donald Trump was tweeting madly when President Obama was in office, saying, when will Obama go on the next vacation if he wins the election? The day after. Our wonderful president was out playing golf all day. The TSA is falling apart. President Barack Obama's vacation is costing taxpayers millions. I mean, on and on and on. And now he's golfing every weekend.
It is a little bit difficult to stomach, especially, and Democrats did this with George W. Bush. And, so this is a political tactic. But I think that for his image, right, because everything that's going on right now with the Russia investigations, with his legislative policy agenda, he should be looking, okay, how does this look to the American people, especially so many of those who are, are not of, high, weren't wealthy, right, that voted for him. So it would be better for him strategically to be back in the White House and to show that he's really driving policy and serious about this if he's concerned about his image.
And Michelle Bernard, you look at the calendar that shows the weekends that he's been at Mar-a-Lago, the third, all the way through February, all the way through March. I think Trump's core base doesn't care what he does. He could, essentially do whatever he wants. He said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. I believe that is true. But there are still Republicans who ran for office, or there are still Republicans who live in districts that Hillary Clinton either carried or came close to carrying. And there are independents. Independents exist, and some of them voted for Donald Trump. How does this make him look to them?
I think they really have quite a quandary on their hands when it comes to Donald Trump and the money that they are spending that we as citizens are spending to keep him secure as he travels around the country to play golf. It's kind of funny, that there's that saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. These were all the things that they complained about President Obama and frankly about other presidents. It's a fair complaint, I believe, when it comes to the president. I don't think that the country can do anything about it, and what we really need to be focused on, quite frankly, is the budget and where money is, where they're proposing budget cuts, and that sort of thing. When it comes to Melania Trump, I got to tell you, I really believe that it is inherently anti-feminist and anti-woman for anyone to believe that they should dictate how she decides what is best for her life and what is best for her son. Maybe the public complaints will get the Trumps to cough up some money when it comes to, security that the city is spending on taking care of her, but she fully has a right to decide where she wants to live and what is best for her life and how she's going to conduct herself as the First Lady. It's no one's business, just like it was no one's business when it came to Michelle Obama's decision to bare her arms or wear shorts or, focus on childhood obesity and eating healthy.
Well, let's get into that a little bit, because Fernand, we've talked about this before, the idea that, the First Lady of the United States is essentially is refusing to live in the White House, but not only that, but her husband's travel is costing not just New York. We talk about New York a lot, but you're down there in Florida, just Mar-a-Lago at all. We talked about the budget. Politico's estimated, based on the General Accounting Office, based on reporting on a similar Obama trip, every trip that he takes to Mar-a-Lago costs $3 million. That Florida has to pony up a lot of that. Palm Beach itself, from a New York Times report, $200,000 in lost fuel sales at a local airport because they can't use it. 75 no-shows at a restaurant in just one night. $60,000 a day in overtime. 250 private flights. So, you have the right of the Trumps to live the lifestyle they want, and then you have the cost these communities have to bear.
Well, first and foremost, Joy, let's not blame the First Lady, because would you want to live with Donald Trump in the White House and be stuck with him? I certainly wouldn't. But look, the fact of the matter is the predatory payday loan presidency of Donald Trump continues. And just like in any good con, and just like in the payday loan industry, lots of promises of easy money, convenience, and happy talk until the sticker shock kicks in and the fine print kicks in. And it's in this case, no different, Joy, as you point out. Let's look at the numbers, because the numbers are rather compelling, in my opinion. $150,000 nearly a day, which translates to about $50 million a year, just to keep Melania at Trump Tower at taxpayer expense. And then these golf trips, the gall of these billionaires and millionaires who like to brag about how much money they have, yet the public has to foot the bill for their travel. We've got nearly 6 trips. We're not even 2.5 months into this presidency, hitting on the $20 million mark. Yet at the same point in his presidency, how many trips did Barack Obama take? 0. And Donald Trump has the stones to say that Obama needed to get off the golf course. Joy, it's just the con of a presidency. It goes on and on and on.
And I mean, to the point. I mean, Michelle makes the point that we shouldn't criticize the First Lady for where she wants to live. However, the choices she's making do impact the taxpayer, right? So Michelle Obama did Let's Move, but she raised money from private entities like Walmart and Nike to get behind that program. The Secret Service has put in a request for an additional $60 million just for next year alone. $28.6 million of that is just to protect Melania and her son at Trump Tower. Yeah. Is there a fairness issue here, and should the Trumps reimburse maybe the taxpayer for these costs?
I think it gets difficult when you ask someone to reimburse, because the only 2 people that are required to have Secret Service protection are the president and vice president. Sure. It would be a national security nightmare if a grandchild or a child or, the son-in-law of the president was kidnapped or injured or hurt in any way. There should be no concern on the federal side with respect to budget. There should be concern as far as the Trumps are concerned, to be mindful of what they do and don't do. One of the things that Michelle Obama got a lot of flack for was her foreign travel. Well, it turns out at the end of the term, she did less foreign travel than Hillary Clinton and Laura Bush. And she was mindful of those costs. And the Trump should be mindful as well. Does he need to go to Mar-a-Lago every weekend? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Does she need to take a separate plane down to Mar-a-Lago as opposed to meeting him in Washington and taking Air Force One, which is already moving down there?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things they have to be careful about.
I mean, what do you make of this argument that is sort of, I mean, there's the 2 separate things. There's the Trump loving to go to golf every weekend and the optics of that and the cost of it, and then there's the Melania living situation. Your thoughts?
Right. I tend to agree that, Melania Trump, I agree with Michelle, has the ability to do whatever she needs to do. Now, I live in New York City. I live just around the corner from Trump Tower, so I would agree that for my convenience sake, that it would be great for her to live down there. But I think that the American people really want them to just focus on getting things done, right? Everyone can scream politics. This is what we do. We talk about the fact that they're golfing, and, Republicans were so critical of Michelle Obama and Barack Obama for playing golf. It's like, let's trim the fat here. Let's talk about stuff that actually matters, because it's those kinds of conversations and complaints, honestly, that make Americans tune out. They get apathetic about politics. They don't vote, and they have this just animosity toward Washington, instead of saying, okay, how can we work with our government? Let's call our senators. Let's feel like we have an efficacy to affect our lawmakers.
But Michelle, at the same time, there is a let them eat cake sort of aspect to this. I mean, this is a family that lives in a literal golden tower, and that is asking for our sympathy because they don't want to all have to be forced to live in the 240-year-old house. I mean, there is an aspect of it that it seems unfair that the taxpayers have to pay for their lifestyle. I mean, even if you want to feel badly for the situation that she has with wanting to keep her son here, we're paying for this.
Well, the argument that I would make to the Trumps, like if I were an advisor to Melania Trump, one of the things I would do is say, go back in history, and just look at what other first ladies have done in order to deal with these type of issues. Jackie Onassis, she went out and she raised monies privately to be able to do all of the renovations that she wanted to do to the White House. There has to be a way, given all of Donald Trump's allegations about his wealth, assuming that it's there, to be able to deal with this and reimburse the taxpayers in New York for the security of his wife and of his son. My only point is simply that no one has the right to tell Melania Trump that they know better than she does where she should live or how she should raise her son. All of the issues around the fiscal appropriateness of this, I absolutely agree with, but I think that there is a way for the Trumps to be able to take care of this, and if Donald Trump were smart, he would do so. All of the allegations that he constantly made about Barack Obama are going to be thrown back in his face, and when it comes re-election time, if he makes it through the following 4 years, he's going to have to contend with how he spent the nation's money.
Yeah, and Fernand, is there any Donald Trump won Florida, but is there any discontent at this point with the amount of money they are spending just on their lifestyle?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, there is a contempt for the process, a contempt for the people in this flagrant disregard. You know, again, on one side of his mouth, he talks about saving the American taxpayer money and the efficiencies and all the winning he's going to bring. But the truth of the matter is, it is a massive inconvenience. The people of Palm Beach County alone are already talking about not only the costs involved, but the quality of life issues. And let me get back to the fundamentals on this. This is a conscientious decision made by the President and the First Lady. I take exception with some of the comments on the panel. These are people that know what they're doing, they know the implications, and they do it anyway because they don't care. I find that contemptuous of the American people and the American taxpayer.
Yeah, and we just had these financial disclosure forms, Ishar, that show that Ivanka and Jared, the son and daughter, the daughter and the son-in-law, they're beneficiaries of about $740 million in real estate investments. You have the other sons traveling on business with taxpayer-funded security. This family is living quite well on the taxpayer dime, and Donald Trump still has not made a commitment to not take his salary. He said he was going to donate it back. We have no sign he's going to do that.
Yeah, and he asked the press corps for, I don't know if you remember that, for advice on where they should donate.
Where should it go? Yeah. He should ask April Ryan. He asked her for all the advice.
So, you know, this goes back to the mindfulness issue. You know, the Trump sons have a right to be in business. They have a right to go do business, but they should be mindful of their travel if they're going to travel with the Secret Service, because there's advanced teams, lots of expensive hotels, they're not staying in cheap places, and it costs the taxpayers a lot of money. By the way, there's an easy way to sort of calm this down politically for the White House.
Sure.
Admit that they were wrong, which they're never going to do.
Nope.
But any other administration would say, you know what, President Trump, you don't know what the job is like until you're in it.
Yep.
And now he recognizes why you need to go play golf and why you need to get out of the White House. By the way, every president should go play golf. Thank God. It calms them down.
And by the way, Camp David running empty. I think you might have tweeted this.
$8 million a year.
So he ain't using it.
All right. He ain't using it.
Thank you very much, Kristen Haglund. Welcome to the show, new friend of the show. Yashar Ali, Michelle Bernard, and Fernando Mondi, longtime friends of the show. All right, thank you guys all. Coming up,
thank you.
Actress and comedian Yvette Nicole Brown joins me live to talk about her very, very timely new documentary.
I mean, it's constructed in 5th grade, but it may allow a child to get his way, but that's not how our government works.
It was already overcast in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, but Freedom Caucus member Justin Amash cast some additional shade with those words for Donald Trump. Amash was responding to Trump's earlier attack on the Freedom Caucus for the central role they played in tanking one of Trump's key campaign promises to repeal and replace Obamacare. On Thursday morning, the president tweeted, "The Freedom Caucus will hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast. We must fight them and Dems in 2018!" Exclamation point. Trump's declaration of war against the GOP's most conservative wing, formerly known as the Tea Party, prompted this response from Amash. It didn't take long for the swamp to drain real Donald Trump. No shame, Mr. President. Almost everyone succumbs to the D.C. establishment. Then Trump decided to get specific and singled out individual Freedom Caucus members, Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, and Raul Labrador. And then things got really ugly. Trump's social media director, Dan Scavino, took to Twitter to summon the power of the Trump train to defeat Amash in a primary challenge, which might prove a bit tricky, because the Freedom Caucus members were the original anti-government, anti-establishment outsider candidates beloved by the GOP base. They specialize in primarying sitting Republicans. Remember former House Majority Leader Eric Cantor? Poof, gone. And what better way to shore up their cred with their Tea Partying voters than by publicly thwarting the most powerful person in the D.C. political establishment, the president, which is probably why Representative Amash seemed hashtag unbothered when he responded, "Trump admin and establishment have merged into hashtag Trump establishment. Same old agenda. Attack conservatives, libertarians, and independent thinkers." And joining me now, our conservative commentator, Kristen Haglund, Michelle Bernard, president of the Bernard Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, National Republican consultant Kate Dawson, and MSNBC contributor Charlie Sykes. All friends of the show. Our new friend, Kristen, I'm going to let you go first on this, because I do find it a bit strange that Donald Trump and his team, or I guess Donald Trump, is trying to sort of cast the Tea Party guys as the establishment when isn't he the establishment?
Right. Well, it is going to make his life very, very difficult when it comes to midterms, because Donald Trump was not popular with the conservative base during the primaries.
Right.
And he had to really win them over, and a lot of conservatives felt like they were holding their nose and voting for Donald Trump. And they said, you know, we'll overlook maybe some of his past political leanings or things that he said that we did not appreciate,
right,
if he'll get us results. right? And so he's throwing away this constituency that he worked really hard to get. So these House Freedom Caucus members are in a really good position. They're in very safe seats. And even if Donald Trump does try to primary or does try to, move the momentum that way, he's not going to be able to, because the Koch brothers and several of their organizations have pledged 8-figure funds to support these guys. And now they are incumbents, and the National Republican Convention, that committee, they have to support those men with their dollars. So they're very safe, and they've got a very strong argument here.
Yeah, and Kate and Dawson, one of our faves here, because you are such a good strategist. What could the possible strategic value be if you are in a Republican White House of going to war with the most conservative Republicans in your caucus?
It's a waste of time, Joy, is what it is. These 33 members of the Freedom Caucus are conservatives. They're from bedrock conservative districts. Very, very hard to beat. But you can make them uncomfortable. Most of these guys hardly ever get primaried. I mean, they are out of the Tea Party mold. They're the ones that ideologically are looking at the debt at all times. Congressman Mulvaney, now budget chairman, director, was out of that caucus. So very hard to beat them. Again, I think Donald Trump's soon going to be looking at the Senate. That's where the action's going to be. That's where the play's going to be. So we'll see if the rhetoric matches the bully. Any president can beat 1, 2, or 3 people if they focus, Republican or Democrat. If they decide that you're the guy that you've gotten in the president's way, the donors and the infrastructure can come in and take 1 or 2 out. You're not going to deal with 33.
And I think that's also the point, Charlie. I mean, you have a president that won Michigan by, maybe 10,800 votes. I suspect probably Justin Amash won his district by somewhat more than that when he won election. On Saturday, he tweeted back at Dan Scavino, "Bring it on. I'll always stand up for liberty, the Constitution, and Americans of every background. You can help here." So he basically is using it for fundraising. I mean, is going after somebody with that specificity, besides the potential Hatch Act violation that's involved in it, is that just smart politics?
No. Mark Twain once said that to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, apparently, Donald Trump's a man with a Twitter account who thinks that the answer to everything is a bullying tweet. The problem is, just do the math here. You can only lose, Republicans in the House can only lose 22 votes to get anything passed, whether it's tax reform, infrastructure, debt ceiling. There are 33 members of the Freedom Caucus. So, again, do the math on this. How does this end well? Well, unless Donald Trump thinks that he's going to get Democrats to bail him out and cooperate with him, he's basically picking exactly the wrong fight. First of all, because he needs the votes, but also because this is going to divide the Trump conservative base. It creates a real dilemma for the Trump shills. What are the Sean Hannitys and the Rush Limbaughs and the Laura Ingrams going to do now? Because, they want to support Trump, but these are people and groups that they have championed for years and years and years. So I also think that Justin Amash has come up with a very, very interesting phrase. He talks about the hashtag Trumpstablishment. That's a meme that can be very damaging to Donald Trump, because his entire brand is being anti-establishment, and yet he's going up against the genuine anti-establishment members of his own party. If that sticks, it could actually start eroding his base.
And Michelle Bernard, that is a very good point, because the idea was that Donald Trump was going to come in and clean up Washington, but if now he allows the Tea Party to pull the same sort of act on him that they did on an Eric Cantor and say, no, he's the swamp, we're the ones who are draining the swamp, doesn't he place himself in a completely untenable position when he has to do other things? He wants to do big tax cuts. He wants to do other stuff.
Yeah, he's put himself in a very difficult position, and frankly, it started even, during the negotiating process. One of the things that we should look at is really who has the leverage, and does the Freedom Caucus have any reason to truly fear Donald Trump? It was Donald Trump, as the negotiations were going on, that capitulated and agreed to a plan in the proposed health care plan that would drop essential benefits as a way to appease the Freedom Caucus, and the Freedom Caucus still said, we're not down with the program. No. We are not going to vote for this. And he sort of showed his cards. They smell blood. They have no reason to negotiate with him. And I would guess that they are believing, that in 2018, members of their constituency might be feeling some buyer's remorse. You know, I think he is gambling and betting on his belief that all of the people who voted for him are going to come out against these people in 2018, but they work for their constituents. They do not work for Donald Trump. Their job is to do what their constituents ask them to do and why they put them in office. And right now, they are very well painting Donald Trump as part of the establishment.
And Kristen, it's interesting because Donald Trump, after the defeat of his American Health Care Act, said he's done. He's moving on. He's not doing health care anymore. Just this morning, he tweeted that he's back in the game. Anybody, he says, especially fake news media, who thinks that repeal and replace of Obamacare is dead does not know the love and strength in our party. Charlie just pointed out there are 33 members, we think, of the Freedom Caucus. They don't really publish their numbers. He can only lose 22. Only 18 of them voted against the bill and still tanked his bill. If they go back and do health care again, isn't it the moderate Republicans that are the most at risk when they go home in 2018, back again with something probably even more draconian, more cuts to Medicaid, more cuts to essential services? That doesn't hurt his Tea Party members. That puts the moderates on the hook in 2018.
Right. It's really difficult. And, you know, my favorite line was, nobody knew how complex health care would be.
Yeah.
We all knew.
Who knew?
And this is what is concerning to me, you know, as someone on the right, is that we had 8 years to do this. And so many groups, think tanks, et cetera, were trying to push Republicans to say, come up with a tenable plan, right? Let's unify around this. Because the plan that Paul Ryan and Donald Trump supported only had about 17% approval rating. Yeah. So they really do have to go back to the drawing board and take their time. Because at the end of the day, people back in their home districts, they want to know that they're covered. They want good health care. Right. And this bill sent premiums right back up 15 to 20% next year. They have to get good results, and GOP has to prove that they can govern well.
And Kate and Dawson, they do already have a plan that's on the table. There were Republican governors, including the governor of Ohio, who got together and said, look, we've got a way that you can shore up Medicaid. Did they even look at that plan and as a starting point to coming up with an idea that still kept people covered?
Well, I think they looked at everything, but let me give you a political reality. Whoever owns health care is probably going to lose. 8 years we ran and loaded the decks all over the country on President Obama and health care. If you want to look at the political spectrum, when you come home, it's really tough, and soon the Republicans might own health care, and we got the midterms coming up, 2018, which usually decimates a party. So there's your diciness in campaigns and elections is, if you own it, you better explain it, and it better work.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back into healthcare seems like an insane idea for a party that's going into midterm elections. Kristen Hagelin and Michelle Bernard will be back. Thank you, Kate and Dawson and Charlie Sykes. Appreciate it. And coming up next, Trump says the real story is not Russia, it's the leaking. Okay.
Is the real story the surveillance or what's going on in the investigation?
I think all of it needs to be examined. Obviously, if there was intentional disclosure of names of people who were in the Trump campaign, that has to be revealed. But the fact is that we know for a fact the Russians tried to change the outcome of our election, attacking the very fundamental of democracy. We know they did that. We need to know how, we need to know why, and most of all, we need to know what to do to prevent this kind of activity, which they continue to carry on in free nations around the world.
Senator John McCain tried to refocus the nation's attention on the issue at hand, Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Meanwhile, Trump took to Twitter this morning to decry surveillance and those leaking leakers, all caps. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, ranking member of the CIA subcommittee of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you so much for being here, Representative. So let's start back with what McCain had to say. He was asked to comment on the chairman of the committee on which you serve, Chairman Nunes, and this is a question as to whether Nunes is acting properly as House Intelligence Committee chair. Take a listen.
This is obviously a schism between Republican and Democrat, let alone the bizarre fashion with which all of this happened. If we're really going to get to the bottom of these things, it's got to be done in a bipartisan fashion. And as far as I could tell, Congressman Nunes killed that.
Do you think, Representative Swalwell, that Nunes is now a credible chairman for the committee, for the House Intelligence Committee?
He's not credible, Joy, on this investigation, and he should be as far away from it as possible. And to just go back, we had a very credible hearing, a very illuminating hearing with FBI Director Comey on Monday of last week. And then the very next day is where all of this really unraveled. And what I think happened, it's pretty clear. The facts were put forward to the American people that there is an investigation into the president's campaign as to the Russian interference. And so the White House sought to work with and use the chairman as a way to try and validate the president's wiretapping claims. And so the only way for us to get back on track and have a real, independent, credible investigation that makes progress is for him to step aside.
Yeah, and the other option that we've heard talked about, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said it on this program, other people have floated the idea, is doing an independent commission, a 9/11 style commission that would take it out of either of the committees in the House or the Senate. This is Chris Wallace this morning on Fox interviewing Mitch McConnell on the Senate side as to what he thought of that idea. Take a listen.
Given all of the politics on all sides, the continuing controversy, why not appoint an independent 9/11 style commission or have the Justice Department appoint a special counsel so you have a truly nonpartisan, independent investigation that everybody can trust?
It's just not necessary based on what we know now. We've got a bipartisan investigation underway. It's called the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Burr and Senator Warner had a joint press conference this week. I think they clearly laid out that they're going wherever the facts take them. We don't need yet another investigation.
Sir, given the collapse of confidence in the House process, is the Senate Intelligence Committee good enough, or do you disagree with Mitch McConnell and think there needs to be an independent 9/11 style commission?
An independent commission is needed now more than ever, and Elijah Cummings and I wrote legislation back in December and reintroduced it in January to have an independent commission into Russia's interference. Every Democrat supports it. One Republican, Walter Jones, also supports it. And Joy, I wrote that legislation partially informed by my experience. I was a Capitol Hill intern when I was 20 years old when September 11th happened, and I saw how Democrats and Republicans united, came together, did an investigation in the House, but also allowed an independent commission to find out what happened and to make reforms so that we would never find ourselves vulnerable to an attack like that again. We need to do the same thing here, and I think it's not only the most comprehensive way now to find out just what happened, but it's an insurance policy against a compromised House investigation.
Yeah, and short of that, let's just say that that is not to be, and that there will still be House and Senate investigations going on. Do you think that one of the committees, right now the Senate has said they won't do it, but do you think the House committee should immunize General Michael Flynn, give him immunity in order to compel his testimony?
Right now, we don't know what he wants to be immunized from. When I was a prosecutor prior to going to Congress, anytime a witness asked for immunity, you would say, well, what do you have? What are you going to tell us that we can't get otherwise? And right now, we don't know why he wants to have immunity. I can tell you, Joy, generally, innocent people don't seek immunity, so I would also want to know if the Department of Justice is okay with this. But right now, General Flynn, we know that he was taking money from Russia's, essentially Russia's intelligence service, which they use Russia Today as a cutout to disseminate false information as a propaganda tool. And I think, at the very least, he should have known better than to do that. So I'm going to hold back until we know just exactly what he wants to give up.
Yeah, you agree with General Flynn on that question of whether or not a guilty, an innocent person seeks immunity. Let me listen to just a very interesting piece of sound. Vladimir Putin aide Dmitry Peskov was on with George Stephanopoulos this morning, and he was asked about what similarities there might be between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Just very interesting. Want to get your reaction. Take a listen.
You said that President Putin and President Trump are very much alike in their basic approach to international relations. How so?
They both insist on their priority as national interests. And they understand pretty well that sometimes it is in your national interest to conduct good relationship with your counterpart, ensuring that those relationships are mutually beneficial.
A lot of Trump supporters take that exact same view, interestingly enough, that Donald Trump's repeated contacts with Russia are actually a positive for the United States because it would allow us to work with what was an adversary. Do you concur with that?
No, Joy, and every time I start to wonder, you know, am I chasing, ghosts here or going down the rabbit hole with this Russia investigation? I take a step back and I remind myself, we are talking about deep personal, political, and financial ties with a foreign adversary. This is not a case of people having such extensive ties to Germany or New Zealand or Mexico. I mean, this is a country that even post-Cold War continues to undermine us in Syria, continues to work against the interests of Ukraine. And we just learned a general said last week that they may be supplying arms to the Taliban, who are killing U.S. soldiers. So Russia's not our friend, and we should look, I think, with a healthy dose of skepticism at any person who has such ties with Russia as they're interfering with our elections.
Yeah. Let alone the President of the United States. Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And coming up, champagne wishes and caviar dreams. Lights.
We know from the filings that were dumped by the White House on Friday that General Flynn failed to report the money that he received from that RT propaganda arm of the Kremlin, as well as 2 other Russian entities.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. That was Representative Adam Schiff of the House Intelligence Panel earlier today on the new revelations, again, about Michael Flynn and his ties to Russia. This time, financial filings that show payments to Flynn from Russia-linked entities that he had previously failed to disclose. The new filings are part of a Friday White House document dump detailing the financial holdings of top administration officials. In the form that Flynn first submitted to ethics officials in February, he failed to disclose a paid speech that he gave in Moscow, as well as income that he received from Russian-affiliated companies. Flynn added the details of those payments to a second, amended version of that form that he signed on Friday. And joining me now is House Intelligence Committee member, Illinois Congressman Mike Quigley. And Congressman Quigley, let's start with that amended filing. Why is it that Michael Flynn, who is now out of government, had to file an amended disclosure form about his finances?
Well, regardless, it still goes to the original filing. He has to be truthful in that. I don't know the particular rules and ethics requirements, but just because you leave government doesn't mean the requirements still weren't there in the first place and don't stand with you as time goes on. We now understand a little bit more about why the general was seeking immunity.
And let's go into just a little bit more about what was known about Michael Flynn at the time that he was hired to be Donald Trump's national security advisor. We know that there were concerns about him that were raised by the acting attorney general at the time, Sally Yates, who we were hoping was going to testify before the committee that you're a member of. The Guardian is reporting some new information that in addition to the payments he received from RT, payments for speeches in Moscow, doing some work for the government of Turkey, there were also some contacts potentially with a person who is affiliated, I guess, with the Russian GRU. One of the concerns involved an encounter with a Russian-British graduate student named Svetlana Lakova, whom Flynn met on a trip to Cambridge in February 2014. He invited her to accompany him on his next official trip to Moscow with help to help with simultaneous translation. And the Guardian is saying that Flynn and Lakova remained in email contact conducted through an unclassified channel. And in one of those emails, he refers to himself as General Misha, etc. Have you heard anything about those potential contacts with somebody? She's a dual Russian national who may also be linked to Russian intelligence.
Let me tell you, what I was first concerned about was the fact that General Flynn had been fired by a previous administration for just these kind of problems. Some of the nuance that you're going into is work that the committee is investigating right now, the documents we're looking at, and as we go forward, people that we interview. So it's difficult for me to remember which field comes from what was open source and closed source, but I'll just tell you that unfortunately General Flynn is fertile ground for investigating Russian influence into the democratic process. We're going to take our time. We're not going to prejudge. But I assure you, when I was asked, who do you want to testify first, who would help you understand most if they testified fully and completely, and General Flynn was my first guest.
And on the question of his testimony, the ranking member of your committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, earlier on CNN expressed skepticism that he would allow Flynn to do so with immunity from the House Intelligence Committee. Let's let you listen to that.
The skepticism is, we'll need to consult with the Justice Department. They obviously have a lot of equities here. We don't want to do anything that will interfere in any case that the Justice Department may decide to bring. We also have to determine whether he really can add value to our investigation, whether we need him to learn information we can't learn from other sources.
And sir, the Senate Intelligence Committee has already indicated that they are not open to the idea at this time of giving Michael Flynn immunity to testify. To your knowledge, is the House more open to that idea?
No, I don't think so. I think Ranking Member Schiff raised an important point there. We would need what we call a proffer. What is it exactly he anticipates to testify to? We would have to work with our Senate colleagues. We would have to work with the Justice Department to make sure that we're not stepping on their investigation, because that investigation, again, wouldn't necessarily involve just General Flynn, but everything in this investigation is tied to everything else. It's extraordinarily complicated, intertwined, so there's no rush to do this. I anticipate at some point in time General Flynn will be before us. I think at this time he probably recognizes it makes sense for him to come forward. We'll have to see.
And lastly, sir, do you have confidence in the chairman of your committee, Chairman Nunes?
I'll say this. Chairman Nunes ran an extraordinarily fair process through the first part of this term. The first 2 years under this chairman, I think he did a great job. It's been difficult, I think, obviously, under this president. I think he has conflicts internally. He can't serve two masters. We have to recognize, though, he's not stepping down. And the only other person that can make him step down is the Speaker of the House. He has said he won't do that. So we have to work together at this point. Chairman Nunes has to realize he can't serve two masters. He has to do this investigation impartially to maintain its credibility. Right. So we have to trust each other. We have to move forward. But we can't have any more midnight excursions. We can't have any more distractions. Yep. We can't cancel any more public hearings on this matter. So much of it is in the chairman's hands.
Yep, we will see if he follows your advice. Congressman Mike Quigley, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And joining me now is Tara Palmieri, White House correspondent for Politico, David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones, and Rosa Brooks, former Pentagon official. So let's jump right into it, and I'll go to you first, Tara. You heard Congressman Quigley say that the only person that can remove Chairman Nunes from his position is the Speaker of the House. He expressed some confidence. You've had Congresswoman Jackie Spears say absolutely not. She has now called on Nunes to step aside as chair. She has expressed a complete lack of confidence in him. From your reporting, does Nunes survive?
I think he will survive as long as there are there's no further reporting of more links between him and the White House. I think his credibility has been greatly damaged, and he needs to show that he's aggressive about this investigation, that he's not partisan and he's not carrying the water for the White House. But I mean, if Speaker Ryan, knowing what he knows about the fact that he went to the White House, retrieved information from White House officials, presented it as if it was independent information for a press conference that supported the president's claims that other intelligence officials have completely dismissed, and he still thinks he can stay on, I think that he would need to do, I know, maybe there just needs to be more information of complicity with the White House, but for now, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the Speaker of the House decision, and he doesn't think that that's enough.
Yeah, David Corn is laughing at the idea of that kind of... why are you laughing, David?
I'm not laughing at Tara, because I love Tara and her reporting. I'm laughing at the whole situation here. This investigation, I think, is shot. I think it's done. It's a dead parrot. It's not alive. It's not pining for the fjords. And I don't see how it gets back on trail. I mean, imagine what Nunes would have to do at this point to show his independence from Trump and the Republican Party and from the cover-up or the stonewall, the distraction that the White House has been trying to mount. He hasn't been able to do it. Every time he's had a chance in the last week and a half since this began, he's blown that opportunity. So I feel bad for Adam Schiff, because I think he would like to have the investigation move forward. But I think at this point, anything that Nunes does from here on in is 100% suspect. And I feel bad about that, because we need the Congressional Intelligence Committees to do effective oversight overall, and particularly on the Russian Trump scandal.
Yeah, and I think, there have been other members of the House of Representatives who have expressed a lack of confidence. Jackie Spears is the first to come out and say Nunes should step aside. I want to play you guys what Ranking Member Adam Schiff, who is intrepidly trying to go forward with some credibility, at least as the ranking member, this is what he had to say, I think, about the central point here, which is the White House's own role in proffering that information to Nunes that he then turned around and proffered back to them. Here's Adam Schiff earlier on CNN.
First, the deputy assistant to the White House informed me when I went to see them that these are exactly the same materials that were shown to the chairman. Now, this is a very interesting point. How does the White House know that these are the same materials that were shown to the chairman if the White House wasn't aware what the chairman was being shown?
Rosa Brooks, your answer to that question.
I think never underestimate the role of stupidity, among other things here. I mean, that's what this is a story about. I think this is not necessarily a vast conspiracy, although you never know. It might turn out to be one. I think this is a bunch of overzealous NSC staffers thinking they're doing the president a favor. I think this is Nunes liking the cloak and dagger aspects of rushing off to the White House in the dark of night to view secret documents and then mouthing off about it. And now they're all trapped in this web they've created, which has more to do with stupidity. Yeah, I mean, the credibility of the House investigation at this point is absolutely shot. Luckily, that isn't the only investigation. On the Senate side, the Senate Intelligence Committee seems to be a somewhat more serious operation.
Yep, and to that very point, we interviewed Leader Pelosi yesterday. We aired that interview yesterday on this program, and she said precisely the same thing. Let's listen to Leader Pelosi talking about the Nunes investigation. Do you think he has credibility now as the leader of that investigation?
No, I think that he not only has lost all credibility, I think he's tarnished the office that he holds. He's brought discredit to something that is a very, very serious position in the Congress. You don't know what the conversation was with the Speaker, but if the guidance was go to the President and then go to the press, that was very wrong.
Pretty definitive. Tara, meanwhile, you're starting to see what at least looks like the movement of some people connected to Mike Flynn out of their positions. We've just learned that Katie McFarland will no longer be in her position. She's being offered a U.S. ambassadorship to Singapore. David is really enjoying these news items this morning. They're shipping her off to Singapore. So Tara first and then giggly David.
Honestly, I had been hearing rumblings about KT being moved from her role since Mike Flynn was removed. That's why Dina Powell ended up getting the deputy position, which Politico reported on last month. And, you know, it's a little suspect when you have a new boss who brings on a new deputy. You have two deputies. Who's the boss? And I'm not surprised to hear this. I've heard from NSC staffers internally that KT was considered to be a lightweight and seemed to be a little too politicized in some ways and not carrying her weight. So not surprised to hear about this. Have been hearing rumblings for a while. But yes, her connections to Flynn make her toxic.
But David Corn, then why is it that Mr. Cohen-Watnick seems to be the only immovable object when it comes to people connected to Mike Flynn?
Well, first you have to ask yourself, what did the people of Singapore do to deserve this? I'm sorry, from half of America, we apologize, Singapore. This is what really is sad, Joy, that what's the #1 job of the U.S. government? That's to protect the American people. In the White House, who has that responsibility? The National Security Council, the National Security Advisory staff. And it's been a mess from the beginning. Donald Trump hired Flynn to do this job, and he didn't last more than a couple of weeks. There are people there, such as the folks who played around with Nunes on that midnight run, and they're still there. And it's not just that it was competence and they got caught up. It's been lying. Sean Spicer has been out there lying about what the NSC did and didn't do in this instance. And so the fact that they can't get the NSC and the National Security Advisor's office straight is really troubling.
And Rosa, is this what people worried about when they talked about the politicization of the NSC really by Mr. Bannon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an internal war that I think is going on, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. And that war is between the grown-ups, and there are a few of them at the NSC. General H.R. McMaster, who came in after Flynn, is a serious guy. He's not a partisan guy. Rumor has it that he has been trying his darndest to oust the people who are just campaign hacks and Trump loyalists who will lie through their teeth if that's what it takes. And he's had some success, and he's had some setbacks. He's obviously working against the Bannon wing, and we'll see how that turns out. And I think, as David says, the depressing thing is that this is not just some kind of reality show. This is actually America's national security that we're putting.
In covering any political scandal, step one is always follow the money. The Russia story is no different. But when it comes to Trump, why would an alleged billionaire need more money? The answer? Extreme debt. Let's review Trump's financial history. After Trump Tower was built in 1983, Donald Trump went on a spending spree. He opened Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City in 1984, then Trump's Castle, New York's Plaza Hotel, Mar-a-Lago, the Trump Air Shuttle, the Trump Princess Yacht, and the Atlantic City Taj Mahal. But then Trump's finances took a nosedive. As the real estate market teetered in 1990, Trump had amassed debt that far surpassed his income. Trump and his businesses owed billions of dollars to 72 banks. Trump's net worth dropped from $1.7 billion to less than $500 million in 1 year, expelling him from Forbes' list of the world's richest people. In the early 1990s, the Taj Mahal, Trump's castle, and Trump Plaza all filed for bankruptcy, breaking Trump's high-stakes monopoly board. Trump declared a $916 million loss on his income taxes in 1995. And yet, by 2005, he had managed to build his net worth up to $2.6 billion, making it back onto the Forbes list. Trump would have needed big money to fund his comeback. But as the Wall Street Journal and Mother Jones have reported, most Wall Street banks were not offering credit to the famous debtor. As USA Today reported this week, Trump and his companies repeatedly turned to wealthy Russians, many of whom are alleged to have ties to organized crime. As Trump himself said in 2013 after a meeting with potential investors in Moscow, "I have a great relationship with many Russians, and almost all of the oligarchs were in the room." And joining me now are Yashar Ali, contributor for New York Magazine and The Daily Beast, David K. Johnson, columnist for The Daily Beast and author of The Making of Donald Trump, and Oren Durrell, foreign affairs reporter for USA Today, who wrote this week's piece on Trump's financial ties to Russian oligarchs. Thank you all for being here. And Oren, I'm going to go to you first because you did have this big piece in USA Today. What are the big findings that you came across in terms of how Russian oligarchs helped to rebuild Donald Trump's finances after they collapsed?
Well, what we found is that a lot of Donald Trump's the condo that he sold were bought by Russian oligarchs and wealthy Russians. We also found that there was multiple people who were involved in the development of the Trump Soho property and some of the other properties that had ties to organized crime, and we found that there were this is sort of a pattern that continued through several of these sales. And
David K. Johnson, you've been reporting on this for a very long time. Donald Trump and rebuilding his financial straits after he had really gone belly up through Russian mob-type people. How and why did he do that, and who are some of the big players in that?
Well, Donald has counted by his own account on Russians for a great deal of money. The easiest case to understand is Dmitry Rybolovlev, sometimes called Rybo, one of the Russian oligarchs who paid Donald an extraordinary price, $95 million plus a commission, for a piece of property near Mar-a-Lago that Donald had acquired 3.5 years earlier for $41 million. And what made that significant, Joy, is that at the time, Donald Trump was arguing he shouldn't have to pay a $40 million loan back to Deutsche Bank because the U.S. real estate market was dead. It was an act of God, and he should be forgiven this $40 million debt. And suddenly along comes an oligarch who overpays by about $50 million the value of the property. If Donald had been a city councilman or a state legislature in Florida, the newspapers would have been all over this and said, is this a payoff?
Yeah, and Deutsche Bank comes up over and over and over again, Yashar, when you talk about Donald Trump's finances, as the last bank that was willing to lend to Donald Trump after U.S. banks wouldn't do it anymore. Bloomberg had an article in which they talked about how much he may still owe to Deutsche Bank that could pose a conflict of interest because the DOJ happens to be investigating Deutsche Bank. He may have a $300 million debt to them.
Yeah, and the other thing with the relationship with these banks is that everyone has to remember is that Donald Trump will take money from anybody. You know, you can replace Russians with, Iranians were under sanction, but let's just assume they weren't. Iranians, North Koreans, any other country. This isn't about Russia so much as about who was willing to give him money when he wanted it. I think Mark Cuban touched on this on Twitter over the weekend. Yeah. He's an opportunist. And then the other thing with all of this is that, Donald Trump has told several of his friends, Maggie Haberman at the New York Times reported this, that he's so frustrated that he can't get out of this cloud, the Russia cloud. Well, there's one very easy way to do it, and that is release not only his personal tax return, but his company's financial statements.
And Oren, that's something he's clearly not going to do, but one of the things he does seem to be doing is to continue to pursue business opportunities all around the world, right? And his son very famously said when he was interviewed back in 2008 by a company called eTurbo News that in terms of very high-end product influx into the United States, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. Say in Dubai, and certainly our project in Soho and everywhere in New York, we see a lot of money pouring in from Russia. There is indeed a lot of money coming in from new builds and resale conflicts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Russians essentially not only as lenders potentially, but also as buyers.
Yeah, so, you know, a lot of this wouldn't be of much interest if Donald Trump weren't president. I mean, this issue of, you know, money coming in from Russia. So this is something else that was part of the report that I wrote, is that these oligarchs are, you know, they're tied in with the organized crime figures in Russia and also with this, with the Russian state security services, and they're tied in with, you know, those are all sort of tied in with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. So the issue here isn't, you know, this is a matter of of money laundering and money coming in from Russia that is obtained in nefarious ways sometimes.
Right.
And these are, but the issue is that such a large proportion of, or potentially large proportion of Trump's portfolio is tied to these types of people that who are beholden possibly to President Putin. So you end up with an American president whose finances are possibly under foreign influence.
Sure.
So
and David,
that's why we really care about
That's why we care about it. And you know, not only Deutsche Bank having ties potentially to Russian money laundering claims, and we've seen that report come out, but you also had the White House in a Yahoo News article, we're just learning, back out of a meeting, David K. Johnson, canceling a meeting with a Russian after learning that he had mob ties. So this is a problem of the image of that as well. So even they are now getting skittish about who he can meet with.
Well, yes, but let's focus on the real substance of this here. As Doran was saying, the Russian oligarchs are essentially a government-sponsored network of international criminals. Donald is deeply in debt to Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank has already been fined $20 billion, including $650 million fine, I think that's the number, for laundering $10 billion of Russian money. The head of that bank, which was also deeply involved back when I was exposing illegal tax shelters in the United States, they were very deeply involved in financing it, moved to the Bank of Cyprus, where Wilbur Ross and a Putin appointee were the #2 guys on the board there, and they chose this fellow. Donald continually does business with people who are directly connected back to Putin.
Yeah, and that is the reason that this is a huge headline. Yashar Ali is going to be back in our next hour. David K. Johnson, thank you very much, and Oren Durrell. And coming up, remember the debt ceiling? Well, the clock is ticking for Congress again. We'll discuss the holdup when we come back. Shutdown of 2013. Good times. We could be heading in that direction again as battles over the budget and raising the nation's debt ceiling loom. April 28th is the expiration date for the continuing resolution that's currently keeping the government funded. Congress is racing to reach an agreement on a spending package before this crucial deadline. So will they make it? Well, joining me now, opinion columnist for The Washington Post, Catherine Rampell, editor-at-large for Reason Magazine, Matt Welch, and MSNBC contributor Jonathan Capehart, who voiced that amazing package that we just saw. Jonathan, excellent job.
Thanks, Joy.
I call you my co-host and chief Washington correspondent for AM Joyce. I'm going to go to you first.
I like it.
Yeah, we love it. No, so what are the issues that are dividing the Republican-controlled Congress over raising the debt ceiling, or is it just the idea of raising the debt ceiling?
It's really the idea of raising the debt ceiling. The one thing to keep in mind here, Joy, is that Freedom Caucus that helped do in the American Health Care Act, well, they are the very people who were dead set against raising the debt ceiling in 2011, the same people who are all about shutting down the government back in, I think it was 2013, and who are poised to do the same thing again. And here's the key thing to keep in mind. One of the members of the House Freedom Caucus is now the director of the Office of Management and Budget.
Yep.
The person who's in charge of shepherding the budget through, and he is dead set, he has been on record as being dead set against raising the debt ceiling. So what you have within the Trump administration is an OMB director who's on record as saying we don't need to raise the debt ceiling unless we get something for it, and a Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, who is on record, as we showed in the package, as saying without question the debt ceiling must be raised.
Yeah, and you're talking about Mr. Mulvaney, the Office of Management and Budget Director, and this is what you wrote about him in your op-ed on this very topic. You said that Senator Patrick Leahy was actually concerned about Mulvaney's nomination. Back in February 16th, he wrote, "I'm equally concerned with Mr. Mulvaney's casual attitude toward the prospect of the U.S. defaulting on its debts during his tenure in the House. He voted against increasing the debt limit 4 times, calling the potential for U.S. default a fabricated crisis, and this does not comport with reality." Catherine Rampell, during that package that we were playing, during the part when Steve Mnuchin said we've spent the money, everybody understands we have to raise the debt ceiling, you kind of laughed because you're like, not everybody agrees with that at all, including him.
The president doesn't agree with this. President Trump calls himself the king of debt. Remember, a large part of his being able to keep his company, his organization alive was negotiating down his debt obligations.
Or just not paying it.
Well, but that was part of it. Right. I mean, the negotiation was, I'm just not going to pay it.
Yeah.
And even during the campaign, he repeatedly said, as you may recall, something to the effect of, oh, well, you know, if the economy goes south, I know we can make a deal on our debt. And the financial press understandably freaked out. So you have Trump not completely understanding the fact that you cannot negotiate down our debt payments without sparking a worldwide financial crisis. You have Mulvaney sort of agreeing with him on all of this, you know, being very cavalier at the very least about defaulting on our debt payments. I would say that there has never been a time when I have been more relieved to have Goldman Sachs alumni in the White House.
Right? There are a lot of them.
There are the grown-ups here.
And it's interesting, Matt, because, yeah, when Donald Trump had huge debts, he could negotiate with the bank to keep Mar-a-Lago by turning it into a private club, and that's what he did. You can't do that with the national debt. Why are there so many people, including in the Freedom Caucus, who think you can? Or you can just call?
I kind of dispute that as a notion, right? I think the interest in both brinksmanship and in fiscal conservatism generally in the Republican Party is inversely proportional to the amount of power that they hold, which in English is when they don't have power, they are the biggest fiscal conservatives you'll ever see, and we have to attach conditions to the debt ceiling, and we have to reform entitlements. Suddenly that all went away in November 2014. Why? Because Republicans took the Senate. And so they really waved the magic wand and said, we won't have to talk about the debt ceiling until 2017 because we don't want that as an issue anymore. So they are not motivated. Mick Mulvaney was sent by Trump to crack the Freedom Caucus's heads during the health care negotiations. So they love that he's unsuccessfully, but there's not enough Freedom Caucus members. We're talking about maybe 3 dozen people here, and they're not motivated here. So the senators, you know, they say that Trump's budget is a non-starter here anyway. So I think we're just going to see another kind of cromnibus, you know, last-minute must-pass thing, support the troops, and it'll happen.
I'm not convinced that Democrats are going to be adults in this situation.
Well, they're the ones now are threatening brinksmanship, because you do have, Jonathan, some threats from Democrats to say that they will actually be the ones to do some brinksmanship over things like cutting Planned Parenthood, and that they may be the ones to try to go to the wire.
But let's keep two things separate here. Brinksmanship over Planned Parenthood and other things, that's about the continuing resolution that expires on April 28th and is separate and apart from the debt ceiling. And when House Minority Leader, who you interviewed on the show yesterday, when she had a meeting with opinion writers on Monday, I asked her the question, you know, what about the debt ceiling? What's your strategy? And she said that a letter it was being signed by the Democratic caucus that will be going to Speaker Ryan telling him that they want a clean debt ceiling bill, meaning a bill with no conditions, no attachments, nothing, a bill that raises the debt ceiling. Otherwise, they're not playing ball.
Yeah, and John McCain, let's listen to what John McCain has had to say as well. John McCain has said that he told CNN on Wednesday, if there's only one option, I will not vote for a CR, continuing resolution, no matter what the consequences, because passing a CR destroys the ability of the military to defend this nation, puts the lives of men and women in the military at risk. So he's also playing some brinksmanship too, McCain, on the Senate side.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with the debt ceiling, with the budget as well, is that these are always must-pass bills, which means that they get a lot of annoying riders attached to them, whether it's defunding Planned Parenthood or you know, the funding for the Mexican wall, et cetera. And so you always have this hostage crisis where people say, you know, the minority says we want a clean bill, or the majority says that, and it never actually happens.
So who ends up taking the hostages here? Do you think think that there will be hostages taken, or we're going to get a clean debt limit increase?
I think we'll get a clean debt limit in the fall. We don't need to have that happen at the end of April. April will likely see a continuation of what we had in the budget last year, but with more money on the military, because again, Republicans were interested in cutting the sequestration cuts on military back when they didn't hold power. Now that they do, everybody wants to throw more money at the military.
Yeah, suddenly they
so
want
we're going to be spending more money under Trump than we did under Barack Obama, almost certainly.
And one correction to myself, the Democrats' brinksmanship is over the funding of the wall, I believe. I think that's one of their other must-not-haves for them to go along. All right, thank you to Catherine Rampell, Matt Welch, and Jonathan Capehart will be back in our next hour. Appreciate it. And coming up in our next hour, conservatives fighting conservatives. And actors...
I have a simple question. What the heck are you thinking? What is in your mind? Why would you want to give out any of your personal information to a faceless corporation for the sole purpose of them selling? Just last week, I bought underwear on the internet. Why should you know what size I take? Or the color? Or any of that information?
Congressman Mike Capuano expressed how so many people felt after congressional Republicans voted to roll back internet privacy protections that were set to take effect at the end of this year. The bill, which Donald Trump is expected to sign, leaves internet service providers free to sell your online data, like your browsing history, without your permission. And joining me now, MSNBC's chief legal correspondent, Ari Melber, and Federal Communications Commissioner, Mignon Clyburn. Thank you very much both for being here. And Commissioner Clyburn, I want to start with you on this. This was Congressman Steve Scalise on Tuesday on the House floor justifying this vote. Take a listen.
The internet was not broken and did not need the federal government to come in and try to fix it. The bottom line is that families expect and deserve to be protected online with a set of robust and uniform privacy protections. These rules simply do not live up to that standard.
Is that the case, Commissioner?
The public does expect to be protected, and the privacy protections that the FCC put into place harmonize its protections with what the FTC is doing and what the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights has done. And so these rules that the public expects, they expect to have control over their personally identifiable information. The FCC sought that we put that in place back in October, and now we're on the cusp of all of that being eliminated, and the information, your most intimate information, including medical history, your browsing history, your social security numbers, that could be harvested and sold to the highest bidder. That is what is at risk.
And you know, Ari, I want to explain to people what this all means, but I first want to play Senator Jeff Flake, who's one of the sponsors of this bill, and he was arguing that that basically the rules that were being put in place unfairly advantaged companies like Yahoo and Facebook because it treated broadband companies differently. Let's listen to Jeff Flake.
Most of the data gathered is actually gathered by the so-called edge providers like Google or Facebook, and they aren't touched by any of the FCC regulations at all.
Can you explain all of that in layman's terms?
You want to get into this?
Yes.
Well, the FTC and the FCC have different legal mandates for different types of companies, so it is true broadly that there is some differential treatment, and if you were starting from scratch, you might want it to be uniform.
Right.
However, that is not really the best argument against having some privacy protections, and what this bill did was completely gut them. Think about the world we live in nowadays, right? You wouldn't say to someone, hey, come up in my home, rifle through my stuff, sell the information that you find, so maybe you don't take anything out of the underwear drawer, to use the congressman's example, but you write down information, and then you leave, sell it, and I get nothing. Nobody would make that deal. And yet for most people, and especially young people, the most important stuff you have is probably digital. The most personal stuff you have about who you talk to, what you shop, how you book your WebMD, all this stuff is inherently digital because of the way we live our lives. So the notion that this Congress is trying to gut what was done in the Obama era and make it easier to, as I'm saying, rifle through that digitally, sell it, and what do you get? You get nothing. Yeah. So it's not like a deal. It's not really a deal. No. It's really weird. So, yes, I think if you were starting from scratch, you might harmonize FTC, FCC, and other legal mumbo-jumbo. But the core point here is this doesn't look like a thing that anyone would do for consumers or citizens. Yeah. It looks like, and I'm saying this as legally fairly as I can. It looks like a thing you would do only for corporations.
To make money on your data, basically. And Commissioner, what is the justification of your new chairman who is for this change? How do your fellow commissioners on the other side of this issue justify doing what Ari Melber just said, essentially allowing people to rifle through your personal data and sell it?
They are claiming that we have not harmonized the rules with the FTC and other privacy-oriented entities, and that is simply not true. What I take issue with Congressman Flake, what he said is that your internet service provider has 100% knowledge over what you do, how you access the internet, what device you use. Edge providers, those like Google and Facebook, they only have a snapshot of what you do. But your internet service provider knows everything about you. They know where you are when you are online, when you access the internet. They know what device you use. They know what websites that you visit. And all of that information lets them into our lives. And if they have access to that information and more about every single digital footprint, everything we do online, everything we search, they can monitor and harvest that information and sell it to third parties, and we are at extreme danger. What if they were to sell that to your insurance company? Then if they knew that I was checking online at McDonald's, then my insurance rates might go up because they might know that I'm not necessarily compliant with my diet.
Right.
Now that might sound a little, far-fetched. It totally is not. What if they were to sell that to your employer and they have access to some information that you might not want them? That can harm you in terms of your economic standing. So having access to that information, all of that information online, our history, and especially when we're talking about the Internet of Things, when you can literally look into my refrigerator and see what I'm doing, that is going to let people in your lives and do what they will with that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of people who are saying, okay, well then we want to buy Congress's browser history. Slade has said you probably can't do it. But I mean, why can't we have their information then? They work for us, the Congress.
Right. This has been a fascinating thing, and there would be laws against trying to individually sort of target or shame people, so it's important as you note that. But yeah, folks online on Twitter, and someone was suggesting a fundraising for it, the idea of, well, if this is such a good idea, what if you went up in everybody's browser history? I mean, I think to the commissioner's point, my Big Mac, my business, I don't think it's anyone's business unless you really want to sell it yourself.
I want to get to, before we go and thank you guys, you have a great news special coming up, and I want to first of all thank Minion Clyburn, the commissioner. We really appreciate it. But tonight on The Point, your great news show, Ari,
Thank you.
Growing Up Trump. Explain it really quickly.
Well, DMX said, I've been rapping 20 years, you're just 20 years old, and that was his point, that some people are too young to be, up in the game. But we are actually flipping that on its head. We want to hear from young people. We're talking to folks who are 20-something in the resistance, new activists, and people who are pro-Trump who are 20-something.
So you're going to have basically a live focus group of Trump supporters and Trump resistors. That is going to be tonight at 5 p.m. It's going to be fascinating. The Point. This has become must-see TV, and we really, I love you coming up here on AM Joy as well. So we have like a tag team going. And coming up next, the Trump administration could be on the verge of a civil war with the GOP, and what the Trump family's lavish lifestyle is costing New Yorkers and people.
And the results are very, very good, so I just wanted to let everyone know.
The same Donald Trump who ran for office on his alleged opposition to the Iraq War is now boasting that American troops are fighting once again in Iraq. Trump is also working to fulfill his campaign promise to loosen the rules of engagement in American counterterrorism operations, rules intended to minimize civilian deaths. Meanwhile, U.S. officials are investigating reports that as many as 200 civilians were killed in Mosul in airstrikes conducted by a U.S.-led coalition. If confirmed, it would be one of the highest civilian death tolls since the beginning of the Iraq War back in 2003. We have to be careful not to forget about America's wars in the deluge of other news about the administration. And to that end, I want to take a moment to note an important anniversary. On Tuesday, it will be 50 years since the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his Beyond Vietnam address at Riverside Church here in New York City, when Dr. King criticized the Vietnam War as a war on the American poor as well as on the Vietnamese people, and urged Americans to focus instead on the battle for social justice still being fought at home.
The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventure in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people, The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways.
Our good friend, the Reverend Dr. William Barber, is kicking off the commemoration this morning, delivering the sermon at Riverside Church. An anniversary event will follow on Tuesday. And up next, community star Yvette Nicole Brown will join us to discuss her new documentary on a topic that literally affects each and every one of us. Stay with us.